So I was reading a book called The Obstacle is the Way, and I discovered that on a night in 170 AD, Marcus Aurelius, who is the emperor of the Roman Empire, was sitting on the front lines of war in Germania, and he sat down and wrote these words. He said, "Our actions may be impeded, but there can be no impeding our intentions or dispositions, because we can accommodate and adapt. The mind adapts and converts to its own purposes the obstacle to our acting. The impediment to action advances action, and what stands in the way becomes the way." What Marcus Aurelius was articulating there is that the secret to breakthroughs is taking your obstacle and turning it upside down. And in fact, if you can get to a point, it'll be very powerful to say that what impedes you and I can actually empower us, and we can move forward through it. I wonder what's getting in your way today, and what's blocking you, and what do you need to break through? And maybe it's life circumstances. Life has not turned out the way that you planned, and you're not satisfied with your job. It's been very depressing or difficult, or maybe your mortgage is more than you can afford, and you've been house poor, and there's been things that have just kind of pressed you down. Or maybe your mother or father has a disease that looks terminal, or maybe your son or daughter has abandoned God, and the circumstances are really disappointing. Maybe there's an addiction that's dominating your life and you just can't shake it, whether it's pornography or drugs or alcohol or just gossip. And you say, you know what? This thing has taken over my life. I live off of it. I thrive off of it. I can't shake it. Maybe there's intense sorrow in your life and someone that you love has died, maybe in the past or in the present, and you just have not been able to move through it. Or maybe there was a betrayal. A coworker threw you under the bus in front of your boss. Or a friend told your secret, or even a brother or sister just betrayed you, and you haven't been able to move through that barrier. Over the next 4 weeks, we are going to talk about and learn how to break through some of the biggest obstacles in our lives. But we got to start out knowing this. I believe barriers are meant to be broken. Obstacles are meant to be overcome. I had somebody come up to me at the end of the last service and say, "I am an overcomer." Can you just say that with me? I am an overcomer. You need to have that sort of mentality if you're going to experience breakthrough. The timeless idea that I want you to become aware of is that great breakthroughs require great obstacles, or else they wouldn't be great. That's what makes them strong. And then also, I think it'll be very empowering for you to just get into your head that tough circumstances prepare you for strong breakthroughs. Tough circumstances prepare you for strong breakthroughs. Would you go in your Bible with me to Psalm 77? Psalm 77, I want to sit there today. Very powerful psalm. And I'm telling you, there are a lot of really great self-help books out there, but none of them compare to psalms like this one. Because in this psalm, you're going to see a secret to breakthrough. And we're going to discover that together. Now, what is a psalm? A psalm, there's 150 of them in the Bible. They are songs of praise. We have long since lost the melodies, but at some point in the past, the Jewish people sang these songs, thousands of years ago even. And they sang them in good times, and they sang them in difficult times. In fact, that might be one of the most powerful things that we learn about the Psalms is that they are shockingly real. They are honest. And I think we need to realize that they teach us how to share our unedited disappointments with God, that you can be raw. God doesn't want tame, sanitized prayers from us. He wants real, authentic prayers. You share your disappointments, your hurts, your hangups with God and express those things to him. That's what we see in Psalm 77. This psalm is one of the classical laments. Lament meaning a song of pain and sorrow that is sung out. This psalm, chapter 77, was written by a guy named Asaph for his friend Davidson. And we don't know the circumstances, but they were tough. Like maybe you've written a note to a friend who is going through a tough time. They just experienced a miscarriage, and so you write him a note. Or a loved one passed away, and so you write him a letter. Or maybe there's a song that you listen to because the lyrics in that song comfort you. You're like, man, when grief hits me, I just want to hear that song. If you can relate to that, you can relate to this psalm right here that was written for a friend during a tough time. Verse 1, I cry out to God. Not in the past, I cried out, but in the present, like it's happening right now. I cry out to God. Yes, I shout, oh, that God would listen to me. God, where are you? Why are you silent? Why are you not paying attention to me? When I was in deep trouble, I searched for the Lord. All night long I prayed with hands lifted towards heaven, but my soul was not comforted. I think of God and I moan, overwhelmed with longing for his help. And then he goes on and talks about how he can't sleep. Have any of you ever lost sleep because you were so worried or stressed out, or there was some obstacle or barrier, like, are my kids going to come home? Are we going to be able to pay the bills? Is my marriage going to survive? You ever lost sleep, any of that? Any of you in the room? I certainly have. Yeah, I'm right there with you. And then he goes on in verse 5. And he says, I think of the good old days, long since ended, when my nights were filled with joyful songs. I search my soul and ponder the difference now. He says things aren't like the good old days now. Verse 7, he says, has the Lord rejected me forever? Verse 10, he says, this is my fate. The Most High has turned himself against me. Ah, the good old days. Back when things were easy and our life was great. Back when we loved each other. It was puppy love. It was the honeymoon phase. We actually loved each other. Things were so great back then. Can we get back to the good old days? We had so much money back then, we could buy whatever we wanted. I didn't have to change all these diapers. My house was clean. I didn't have to have all these bread snatchers dropping crumbs everywhere like Hansel and Gretel all over my house. The good old days. But now things are horrible, he says, and I'm miserable and it's hard. And he concludes, have you ever thought this? God must not love me. You ever get to a point where you look back at the good old days and what you forget is that in the good old days when things were great, you drifted, didn't you? You lost some discipline or you lost track of some things, and maybe that led to some of the separation from God or the rough conditions that you're experiencing now. Maybe not, but sometimes that's the case. But I will say that when people say things like, hey, high school, those are the greatest years of your life, or college, those are the greatest years of your life. Really? Like, you got decades ahead. I'm remembering high school. I was pretty awkward, pretty optimistic that I can continue to get less awkward throughout life. That would be great. I don't want to have peaked in high school. There's so many things to go, so many people to visit, so many things to accomplish on into the future. And I just want to say to you today that dwelling on the past, man, it might feel good. I'm not saying don't ever dwell on the past, but if you're in the need of a breakthrough, dwelling on the past is going to lessen the power of the present, because it's just going to lead to sadness and depression, because you're going to wish things were like they were and they're not. That's not going to lead to breakthrough. That's going to lead to getting stopped by a barrier again and again and again. But notice an extremely subtle but powerful shift in verse 11. I love what he says here. He says, but then I recall all that you have done, O Lord, and I remember your wonderful deeds of long ago. Like what? Well, verse 16, he says, like when the Red Sea saw you, O God, and its waters looked and trembled, and the sea quaked to its very depths. What's he talking about? This is arguably the most important story to the Jewish people, or at least one of the most important stories to the Jewish people. It's the story of Moses. Moses was born in Egypt and raised in Pharaoh's household. And while he was raised in royalty, his people were not. Because his race, the Hebrew people, they were slaves in Egypt. And so while Moses was raised in privilege, they were raised in oppression. And that was his people. God gave Moses a mission to lead the Hebrew people out of slavery and into freedom, to liberate them. And so Moses went to Pharaoh and demanded that his people be released. And through Moses, God sent 10 horrible plagues against Egypt to sway and convince Pharaoh to let these people go. He sent diseases, bug infestations, all sorts of deaths, terrible storms. It was just really, really bad. So bad that Pharaoh said, get out of here, take all your plagues and your horrible people. I don't even want to smell you guys anymore. Get out of here. And immediately Moses and his people, they say, he might change his mind. We got to get out. So they packed up everything they had, carried it on their shoulders, marched out of the country and went out into wilderness next to the Red Sea. And there they camped out, trying to figure out, okay, what's next? What's next? Where are we going? Then Pharaoh had a change of heart. And with all those Hebrews amassed and cornered against the Red Sea, he mounted up on his chariot and got 600 of his troops and raged against the Hebrews, thinking, I hate them. I hate what they did to our country. I hate their God. I'm going to kill them all. And he sets out to go and to slaughter them. Things could not have been worse for the Hebrew people. They were tired. They'd been traveling. They were hungry. They were complaining. And their backs were against the wall at the Red Sea. They had nowhere to go. pinned in. And these are not warriors, these were slaves. They didn't have weapons. What I tell you earlier, great breakthroughs require great obstacles, or else they wouldn't be great. And tough circumstances prepare you for strong breakthroughs. Let me tell you what happened in that moment. God caused the Red Sea to split. Remember we said earlier, verse 16 says, when the Red Sea saw you, O God, do we have verse 16, I think? The waters looked and trembled. And then it says in verse 19, your road led through the sea, your pathway through the waters, a pathway no one knew was there. You led your people along that road. God split the sea open, held the walls of the waters back, and the Hebrew people walked through it. It was a miracle. And as they walked through on dry ground and were crossing, Pharaoh and his troops pursued them and chased them down into the water. And you know what happened? God caused the walls of the water to collapse. They fell on Pharaoh and his troops, and they all drowned. True story. And God made a way where there was no way. And what I think is really interesting here is that God used the very thing that had been blocking in the Hebrew people. He used the barrier. He used the obstacle, not only to make their way forward, but then to defeat their enemy, Pharaoh and his troops. Did you notice that? The thing that was blocking them became their route of escape and the very thing that God used to overcome their enemy. You know what that sounds like to me? It sounds like sin. Because every single one of us, no matter what it is that's blocking you, you could trace the roots back. Maybe it's in your relationship or at work or some other thing. And you say, hey, this thing, if we were to trace it back to its roots, you would say, hey, sin caused that. Might not even have been your sin. Somebody else's caused a barrier that you're trying to figure out, how do I overcome this? How do I work past this thing that was done to me, or that I have shown up and this thing is here and I'm trying to help somebody else over? Well, you could trace the roots back to sin. God saw that sin and how we are totally unable to overcome our sin on our own. And what he did is he entered into humanity in a person, flesh, that we call Jesus. And he took all of that sin, poured out on himself, all the condemnation, all the suffering, and he took it and he defeated it. And then he used it to defeat our accuser and our enemy, Satan. Isn't that incredible? That God used our barrier, God used our obstacle to actually defeat our enemy. And that's God's story again and again and again. And that is your story, that God makes a way where there is no way. So I asked you earlier, what's the thing that's blocking you? What's the thing that's getting in your way? Maybe it is a situation at work and there are like no solutions. Every option seems like a nightmare. Or maybe there's an addiction that you just can't control. You can't escape from it. Or maybe there's a secret that you can't hide any longer. I want you to recognize today that God is able to use that very obstacle to make your way forward and to lead you from slavery to freedom, to lead you from grudge to forgiveness, to lead you from self-loathing to self-worth, to lead you from anger to patience through the barrier. And I would like for you even to envision how right now he is able to use the circumstances that you're in to actually overcome something else. Like you're so worried about this barrier, but there's something that working through this barrier or overcoming it, that thing is going to be used by God to defeat something else. Something that will drive you to be closer to God and make your self-worth and your power and your life increase even more. So think about these questions. How can overcoming the barrier that you're facing lead to greater maturity? How can overcoming this barrier make you stronger? And how are the unfavorable circumstances that you're facing preparing you for breakthrough? Those are really tough, strong, powerful questions, faithful questions. And I think it all goes back to that subtle shift that we saw in Psalm 77 between verses 5 and 11. Verse 5, you remember, he says, I remember the good old days when things were great, back when everything was fantastic. Isn't it ironic that thinking about the happy past makes him sad in the present? Isn't that ironic? You ever find that to be the case? It actually sort of defeats your morale. But then the shift in verse 11, again, I just want to reiterate, he says, but then I recall all you have done, O Lord. I remember your wonderful deeds of long ago. If you want to take your first steps towards breakthrough, like if you are really at wit's end and you have nowhere to go, listen, here's how you take your first steps. Forget the easy times and remember the tough breakthroughs. Forget the easy times for now. They're not going to help you in the present. Remember the tough breakthroughs. Think about our holidays for a minute. Most of the holidays that we celebrate, we're not thinking about the good old days of that holiday. We're celebrating the breakthroughs. Independence Day. Nobody thinks, remember the good old days of the Revolutionary War when troops were freezing and dying out in the snow against the British redcoats fighting and dying? Wasn't that great? No, we're celebrating the breakthrough of battles won during that war and the birth of our nation, the difficult, tough breakthroughs that came as a result of it. Martin Luther King Day, Martin Luther King Jr. Day. We're not celebrating the good old days. Remember the good old days of segregation and oppression and injustice and prejudice? No, we're celebrating a life of courage and boldness and the breakthrough of the civil rights movement. That's what we're doing whenever we remember a lot of the holidays. You forget the easy times, remember the tough breakthroughs, because the past breakthroughs will motivate present breakthroughs. If you just mourn the past, sadly, back when she still loved me, back when I had enough money to buy what I needed, back when I was happy, back when things were great, that's going to lead to sadness and to depression and to hate and to jealousy and a desire to give up. But if you will remember the breakthroughs, it'll remind you what you're made of and what your God is able to do. And that will make you bold. Where you say, God made a way for me where there was no way, and I believe that he will do it again. So you remember the times when your back was against the wall and you fought, and with God empowering, you experienced breakthrough. Like when she said to you, if you don't stop, if you don't change, I'm leaving. And so you stopped and you changed and you're still together. And now your relationship is better than it ever was before because you worked through that difficult thing together. It strengthened you. You trust each other more now. What about at your job and that time where you couldn't pay the bills and things were just coming at you like crazy? You were forced to innovate or else you're going to go bankrupt and have to close your doors. And those changes really led to success in your business. All of that never would have happened if it hadn't been for those tough breakthroughs. You say, man, that was a great breakthrough that we experienced there. Maybe you did something that completely destroyed your friend and you just really hurt them. And instead of just separating and stopping talking to them, you decided to own up to it and to go to them and say, hey, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. I don't know what I was thinking. Can you forgive me? And it was really hard, but you experienced forgiveness. And now your friendship is actually much stronger and your trust is much greater because of the honesty and reality of that tough time that you went through together. I would say if you need to experience breakthrough, don't linger on the past, on how good things used to be. If you're going to remember something, then contemplate the tough times and how they led to breakthrough. That will lead to greater trust and greater maturity and greater strength. And you need to share those battle stories with others. Tell the battle stories. Your kids need to hear about the scars that you've experienced and how they've healed. Your friends need to hear about the mistakes that you've made and how you've learned from them. They need to hear about your pain and how it has led you to be more compassionate. You say, man, I went through that, and so now my heart connects. I have empathy for what they're going through because I've been through the battle. You share those things with others. I am convinced that God lets us fight tough battles, not to hurt you, tough battles in your relationships, at school, at work. You fight those tough battles. He's letting that happen not to hurt you, but to teach you that you are stronger than you think you are. Because God is in the trench with you. If you will look to your left and your right, you say, God is with me. And he's saying, you can do this. Let's take this next hill together. Let's go. Let's overcome the obstacle. Maybe you found yourself before asking, God, why don't you just take this addiction away from me? Well, maybe to teach you that you're stronger than that addiction. And that if you'll trust him, he will lead you to greater self-control. Maybe you say, God, why haven't you just magically fixed my relationship? Would you sprinkle some fairy dust on her so she'll just be nice to me? Maybe to teach you, God is training you, developing you, how to love with true devotion and integrity and faithfulness. Isn't that worth it? I know that she thinks that. No parent ever expects your child to grow and mature if everything's just handed to them. Everybody gets a trophy. Everybody gets an A+ in every single class. That's not how you develop decent human beings. No, you got to work through the obstacle and grow and overcome. That's how you establish a decent human being. And that's where strength is. That's where power is and pride. That's where reward is. Think of the pioneers of the American West who are venturing into uncharted territories and Oregon and all over the West. I mean, these places had not been seen before. I mean, we all played Oregon Trail. Did you play Oregon Trail back in the day? I don't think I ever got to Oregon. Did any of you ever get to Oregon? Because somewhere along the way, somebody broke a leg or they died in a river or somebody got bit by a snake. Somebody always got dysentery. I didn't even know what dysentery was, but somebody's always dying of it, again and again and again. Couldn't get to Oregon. It was just very tough. And so it just was sort of training us even from a young age that, hey, that was a tough time, which led to some of the greatest breakthroughs civilization has ever experienced. Did you know that? Breakthroughs like dry farming. I didn't really know this, but in Oklahoma and Kansas and north of there, some of those regions get less than 20 inches of rain a year. How do you farm? They learned how to farm without irrigation. It changed the game. Now, the soil was so hard that it often broke the plows because there was so little rain. How do you plow? Enter John Deere, who in 1837 invented the first steel plow. He's doing pretty well to this day. I mean, he's not alive, but his company is. 10 years after he invented that plow, he was making and selling over 1,000 plows, steel plows, every single year. Now you got to think about fencing, because up in the mountains, not a whole lot of, the terrain is difficult. And then you get out on the plains, not very many trees. So building wood fences just wasn't a great option. 1874, they patented barbed wire. Not till 1874. Did you realize how recent that was? It's just a little over 100 years ago. And barbed wire is doing pretty good. I think people still use it to this day. Where are they going to live? The pioneers, often poor farmers, and especially in the plains where there's not a lot of trees. How are you going to build a house? How are you going to get shelter from the sun and the intense winds and things like that? They built houses out of sod. They took grass and soil and made bricks out of them, and that's how they built their shelter. And it's like this again and again and again. Every tough circumstance that they went through, every obstacle was met with a new solution. From the telegraph to the transcontinental railroad, innovations in farming equipment, again and again and again. The tough circumstances produced incredible breakthroughs, and they can in your life too. I was thinking, if you're really disappointed with what's going on in your life, then a breakthrough, I just thought of some words. I was like, man, if you're experiencing disappointment, I have been there. Breakthrough for disappointment might look like contentment. Say, man, I wish I could just be satisfied with life, because I'm not. I wish I could be happy. I wish I could be content. I wish I could say that life is fulfilling. I think that would be a big breakthrough for you. Maybe thankfulness. You say, man, I just wish I was thankful. Like I know I should be, but I'm not. I wish I could just be thankful for what I have, even if it's a little, but I'm not. I just wish I had thankfulness. Or maybe hope. The hope to believe that things are getting better. You say, I just don't believe things are getting better. It feels like they're getting worse. A breakthrough might be to experience hope. How do you experience these kind of breakthroughs? Not by dwelling on the easy times when things were so great. That's just going to lead to depression and to sadness and hate and jealousy. Not by comparing yourself to others. You'll never be satisfied. I wish what they had. I wish I had what they had. I don't. No, you reach breakthroughs like this by remembering past breakthroughs. By remembering that God has worked in your life. You can look back and see it. And that brings contentment. Say, man, I can see that. He's brought me to this point. I'm satisfied with what God's doing in my life. I trust my God. And remembering those tough breakthroughs and how things have progressed can lead to thankfulness and gratitude. Say, I'm thankful for where he's brought me, even if it's not as far as I'd like to be. I know that he's broken through some things in my past. I'm grateful for that. And remembering how he has broken through obstacles will give and create hope and belief that it can happen again. I'm not saying that you caused the obstacle in your life. Somebody else might have sinned. Somebody else might have done this thing. They might not have done it to you, or maybe they did it to someone else and you just showed up and there's this obstacle there. I'm not saying that you deserve it. I'm not even saying that God caused it, but I am saying that God is able to use the obstacles in your life for your good, to make you stronger and to bring you to victory. He's done it before. He will do it again. So remember past breakthroughs, and when you do that, It'll empower you to trust in the present. Because the challenge that you're facing could make you more like God and more like Christ. And I don't say that lightly. I'm saying the goal in your life should be to become more like Jesus. The goal of your life is not to have an easy life. It's not. You find people that have everything handed to them, a very easy life. They never have to strive. They never struggle. They never achieve anything. There's no pride in what they've done in their life. And they're very dissatisfied. Those things that we listed earlier, they're not content. They're unsatisfied. They're not thankful. They don't have hope because they're just bored. The life that is fulfilling is the life of becoming more and more like Jesus. I'm telling you that's the case. You ask yourself, how could what I'm going through right now make me more like Jesus, make me more godly? As in, is this thing making me more patient? Oh, what a godly virtue. You're becoming more like God. Praise God. Is this making me more forgiving? Is it making me more faithful, more creative and innovative? There's nobody that was more creative and innovative than Jesus. Is this making me more sacrificial? Is this making me bolder and more courageous? Those are the things that are strong breakthroughs. And you may be frustrated and disappointed with your circumstances, but I'm telling you, tough circumstances can prepare you for incredible breakthrough. 1983, the inaugural Westfield Sydney to Melbourne Ultra Marathon took place. I think they should shorten the name of the race. I don't know about you. It's a 544-mile foot race that takes days to accomplish. A 61-year-old farmer named Cliff Young heard about the race and showed up in his farm clothes and boots, and people were shocked when he walked over and grabbed a runner's number and a jersey like he was going to set out on this race. Like, you're crazy. You're never going to be able to finish this race. It's over 500 miles. It's going to take days to accomplish. You'll never be able to do it. To which he said this, yes, I can. See, I grew up on a farm where we couldn't afford horses or tractors. And the whole time I was growing up, whenever the storms would roll in, I'd have to go out and round up the sheep. We had 2,000 sheep on 2,000 acres. And sometimes I would have to run those sheep down for 2 or 3 days. It took a long time, but I'd always catch them. I believe I can run this race, he said. And that he did. Now, when the race started, the elite runners just left old Cliff shuffling in the dust behind. They had planned to run about 18 hours a day, the elite runners, and to sleep the remaining 6 hours each night. They knew it was going to take several days to accomplish. Cliff didn't know about that plan. He just kept running all night, and the next night, and the next night, and they couldn't believe it. Each night, he just kept running while they were sleeping, and he got closer and closer to the leaders of the pack. The final night, he overtook the leaders, and he crossed the finish line first. And he beat the previous course record by 2 days. He ran for 5.5 days. And nobody could believe it. How does this old, poor farmer have more endurance than elite runners half his age? It's impossible. Nobody would think that these circumstances that he grew up in would train a runner. But instead of dwelling on the easy dreams and wishing that it was easier, Cliff decided that his circumstances and conditions made him strong. What about you? Maybe you're disappointed with life and it hasn't gone the way that you wanted, and circumstances and conditions have not turned out the way that you wanted them to. Man, now is the time that you find out what you're made of. And I think now is the time for breakthrough. And I would encourage you, forget the easy times. Remember the tough breakthroughs. Like grapes that are pressed into wine, wheat that is ground into flour. Tough circumstances produce value in our lives, transforming you into something greater than you would ever be otherwise. So what I want you to do this afternoon, tonight, tomorrow morning, in your quiet time, sometime this week, I want you to do an exercise. Will you guys do this with me? I want you to write down 2 questions, and I want you to answer these questions personally and have a conversation with God about these 2 questions. So maybe you need to take a picture of these 2 questions. Maybe you need to write them down, but I want you to do it this afternoon or tonight or tomorrow or sometime this week. I want you to respond and do this exercise with me. Will you do it with me? Okay, number 1, the first question. What breakthroughs can you remember from your past? What breakthroughs can you remember from your past? Like when you quit smoking. Say, man, that was a huge breakthrough for me. Or when you got a second job so that you could support continuing your education. You're like, man, if I hadn't done that, I know it was hard, but I wouldn't be where I'm at today if I hadn't gone through that breakthrough. The tough financial time when you couldn't pay your bills and you were so stressed out and you were feeling so separated from God, and you just say, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna start praying daily and reading my Bible. And you, since then, your relationship with God has transformed simply because you started turning to him daily. You say, man, that was a big breakthrough. Remember when you couldn't pay your rent, and so it forced you to take a different job, and you discovered that you have a different passion for your career, and it changed your entire direction of life. Say, man, I'm so thankful for that. That was a breakthrough in my past. Or when your ex broke up with you, and it was really, really hard, and you hated it. But you learned through that, a breakthrough, that you wanted something better in a spouse, or you wanted something better in the next person that you're gonna date. What a breakthrough that you will never forget, and it's made you stronger, it's made you better. I want you to write those things down. And then the second question, make sure you take a picture of these. Make sure you write these down, because I want you to do this exercise with me. How have your current circumstances prepared you for breakthrough? And maybe you really have to imagine here. Maybe it's really a struggle for you to even imagine how the difficult things that you're going through could actually be producing value in your life. But let me give you an example. Maybe you've been spending way too many hours at work, and you're starting to understand the value of time with your kids, and you're being prepared for a breakthrough where you're gonna switch some things are gonna shift for you, and you're gonna make some time for your kids, and you're not gonna take it for granted anymore. It's this breakthrough that you're being prepared for. Or maybe the death of a friend that you really respected or really clung to has taught you the value of life. So you know what? I'm not gonna waste my life another minute. Can you find value in the circumstances that you're going through right now and how they're preparing you for what is to come? And as you write down your answers to those questions, I want you to go back and reread Psalm 77, specifically those verses 7 through 9. And I want you to have a conversation with God, and you put yourself into the scripture. You say, God, have you rejected me forever? Will you never be kind to me again? Is your unfailing love gone for me? Have your promises failed me? Have you forgotten to be gracious to me? Have you slammed the door on your compassion to me? And if you are listening and praying, you will not be deceived, and you will know that God has not rejected you and that his promises have not failed you, because you just wrote down the times when he didn't reject you, and when he was kind, and when his promises came through, and when his compassion split the sea and moved mountains for you. And that'll motivate present breakthroughs and the hope that he will do it again. That's where breakthrough begins. But if you want to see it through, you got to come back next week to learn more. I want to hear about your breakthroughs, so I'm going to be right down here. I'll be right over here after the service. I'd love for you to come forward and share stories of breakthrough. Andrew is in the back. If you're new around here, Andrew, our worship leader, would love to meet you. Our next steps area, if you'll just stop there before you leave, pick up a gift. It's our way of saying thanks for being here with us today. I will see you guys next week. You're dismissed.